The National Party says Shane Jones' so-called work-for-the-dole proposal reflects badly on the new coalition government. Leader of the opposition, Bill English, is in our Wellington studio. Kia ora.
Kia ora.
Reflects badly because?
Oh, just because you've got the Prime Minister and a senior minister disagreeing publicly on a proposal that hasn't yet even been put to a cabinet. They're going to have a hard time getting 1 billion trees planted and the railways done if they can't agree on who's going to do it, whether they're going to be beneficiaries and whether they're going to get paid the benefit or the minimum wage.
Well, Schadenfreude aside, do you think it's a good idea?
It's half a story. Look, I think Shane Jones is a bit more realistic than the Prime Minister about these younger people who've been out of work for quite some time. They do need some carrot and stick. But also, they are not going to turn up to planting trees just because you ask them to. They actually, these young people have chaotic lives. A lot of them are avoiding the system. They need pretty much one-to-one support to get them to a point where they're going to be able to regularly turn up to work, whether it's for the dole or the minimum wage.
You've put out mixed messages on this in the past. I mean, on the one hand, you've been dismissive of what you've called the cohort of Kiwis who don't look to be employed. And on the other hand, you said you did not accept that there was a group of people in New Zealand who were not willing or motivated to work. If supported enough, they could get jobs and stick to them.
And that's the key point. The social investment work that was done demonstrates that if you've been on the dole for more than 6 months and you're under 25, there's a lot of complexity in your life because there's been so many new jobs in this economy that people who were willing and able and had the capacity basically have been able to eventually find a job. So with these ones, a straightforward work for the dole scheme won't get them turning up. They need a combination of some carrot and stick, such as some sort of sanctions, which we announced actually during the election campaign.
Well, you threatened to halve the benefits in the election campaign. You wanted to halve the benefits of those with drug problems who refuse treatment or a job.
And they need intensive support to deal with those problems. So that's where you go with the young people. None of that's going to happen while the Prime Minister and a senior minister are publicly disagreeing in a way which is very unusual in the New Zealand system.
Well, it's a coalition, and it's an unusual coalition in many ways, as you pointed out, but there's no point in rubbing that in. You need to come up with some bright ideas of your own, don't you?
Well, and I've just outlined those, and we're not. But this is the government responsible for doing something for young people who are facing 20, 30 years of welfare dependency, and what they're demonstrating is they can't even sort out how to have their own discussion behind closed doors, let alone get a solution to what is a highly complex problem.
But then again, your solution was to import workers.
Our solution was to identify the needs of these people, not just this group, but a whole lot of groups who are caught in welfare dependency, and get to work with them one by one, which we did successfully, for instance, with young sole parents. And that reduced the numbers very significantly, as it did with sole parents older than 20. We've got the lowest number we've had since the 80s. And the next groups are those to deal with, which are harder again, are those who have been chronically out of work with complex social issues.
And how many would you say constitute that kind of hardcore?
Well, under the age of 25, there's 16,000 who are out of work more than 6 months on the dole. About 8,000 of them are currently in schemes, which some of which are successful, but they're tested regularly, or used to be. And there's about 8,000 who are hard to find or simply aren't willing to comply with the system.
This goes to the whole conservative versus socialism argument, doesn't it? How much money do you spend? How many resources do you put into those 8,000?
Well, we indicated we're willing to put quite a lot of resource in, but I have to say this public discussion the government's having shows they're miles away from getting to grips with the reality of the problem. They can't even have a discussion among themselves about a 30-year-old idea of work for the dole. Oh,
well, I think they are having a discussion among themselves. What do you mean they can't have a discussion among themselves?
Well, the normal expectation of a well-organised government is that these are issues they work through in their policy process, and then they produce something which they're willing to be held accountable for.
Well, talking about a well-organised government, Todd Barclay, 2-month summer holiday in Europe thanks to the taxpayer. Is that well-organised?
Well,
or is it just different standards?
No, he has the same entitlement on leaving Parliament as every other MP. I suppose if you went through all the others who left, you'd find out what sort of holidays they've been on.
No, but in June he said he wouldn't stand again. He didn't resign, so he still gets his salary till Christmas. That's $80,000 for doing nothing, essentially. So, different standards?
If you're trying to make some partisan point here,
I'm
you're
not
wrong.
making a partisan point, and
Well,
it's
you
not.
are.
Not at all.
He has
I'm
an
simply
entitlement.
asking. He has an entitlement because he didn't resign. He chose not to resign.
Well, MPs are elected by their electorates under conditions that apply to every MP. He's left Parliament.
The only point I'm trying to make is that I'm wondering if there is a double standard. If there's some young person in Northland unable to get a job, he might get his benefit chopped because you think he's not looking hard enough, but Todd Barclay's got 2 months in Europe. That's the public perception, Mr. English, correct?
The challenges for the young person in Northland are much more complex than what's being proposed as this work for the dole. These are people who will be from benefit-dependent households. They'll often be drug or violence. They'll often be some kind of problems with the childhood sitting in the background. They need individualised attention, not slogans, to get somewhere, and the government is demonstrating that it can't even hold a sensible civil discussion without public disagreement, let alone get to the kind of solutions these young people need.
So, the first thing you would do if you were back in charge is what?
Well, that's hypothetical, isn't it? The first thing we would do is implement the first thing we would do is implement the policy we announced, which is the combination of individualised support for these young people on a localised basis, not from Wellington, because Wellington can't know the circumstances of them all, and the carrot and stick package that we announced during the campaign.
So, if you didn't turn up, if you refused to be drug tested, you'd have your benefit cut in half?
That could ultimately happen, yes. I think that's part of the package. But the other part
I wonder
of it,
what that would achieve.
well, clarity about the obligations of younger people who have capacity, who need to take some responsibility to ensure that they don't end up in a life of dependency.
It's more likely to achieve encouraging them to turn to a life of crime, isn't it? I mean, if you chop
the track
benefit.
record of sanctions is that they don't usually get applied because people end up taking them seriously. Now, this is an issue for the government to deal with, where the Greens want to take away all obligations in the welfare system. New Zealand First have the right instinct about it. There should be some obligations. The Prime Minister has to manage this somehow. Labor seem to be in the position where they want to reduce the obligations as well. And I think most people would believe that if you were 23 and you don't have work, you should have some obligations in return for getting the support that will help you on your way.
What seems in doubt is whether it's work for the dole or whether it's work for the minimum wage with a subsidy top up from the state. Do you know which?
No, I don't, because this is the thing about this government. Listening to them doesn't help understand what they're going to do, because they often say contradictory things. In
Australia, a report last year found work for the dole had increased the probability of an unemployed person finding a job by 2%. Does that make it an unattractive option in your view?
Well, it's something. It's some gain. It's very small.
2%.
But it needs to go with this. The social investment approach, which focuses on highly individualised support, where actually you're spending time and money on the individual to get them motivated, better equipped to get on a better path.
Appreciate your time. Thank you, Bill English, Leader of the Opposition. It's coming up to 9 minutes to 8 on Morning Report.
The Court of Appeal has rejected Ngāti Whātua Ōrākei's bid to stop land they say is in their rohi being